the most powerful way to think. Unlock first principles now. Have you ever wondered why the greatest thinkers and innovators in history seem to see the world differently? Why can they solve problems that seem impossible to everyone else? Why can they take ideas that have existed for centuries and completely rewrite the rules? It's not because they have more knowledge or better resources. It's because they know how to think, how to break reality down to its core, strip away assumptions, and rebuild ideas from the ground up. This is the power of first principles thinking, and if you understand it, you will never see the world the same way again. Most people don't think from first principles, they think by analogy. They take what already exists and make small changes. They follow conventional wisdom, they accept the rules as they are, and they assume that just because something has always been done a certain way, it must be the right way. Think about it, how often do we question the foundations of what we believe? How often do we ask if the way we do things is truly the best way, or if it's just the way we've been told to do them? This is why so many people stay stuck. They try to improve their lives by making minor adjustments, instead of questioning the entire framework they are operating in.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
But first principles thinking is different. It requires you to break everything down into its simplest, most fundamental truths and start from there. Instead of asking, "How do I make this slightly better?" you ask, "What is this really made of? What are the fundamental pieces of this idea? And how can I rebuild it in a way that makes more sense?" This is how Elon Musk reimagined the space industry. Instead of accepting that rockets had to be expensive, he asked, "What are rockets made of? What are the raw materials?" And when he calculated their cost, he realized that they were being sold at an enormous markup. So he built a company that could manufacture rockets for a fraction of the price. That's first principles thinking in action. But this isn't just about business or technology. This is about everything: your beliefs, your habits, your fears, your identity. How much of what you believe about yourself is based on assumptions that you have never questioned? How many of your limitations are not real, but simply inherited from the world around you? What if you could strip away everything you take for granted and start fresh? What if you could rebuild your understanding of life from the ground up? This is where things get uncomfortable. Because first principles thinking forces you to confront the fact that much of what you believe is not the result of careful reasoning, it is the result of conditioning. The way you define success, the way you think about relationships, the way you measure happiness, these are not conclusions you reach through deep thought. They are ideas you absorbed from society, from culture, from the people around you. And that means they might be wrong. Are you really living in the way that makes the most sense for you, or are you just following a script that was handed to you? Imagine if you could reset your mind the way you reset a computer, wiping away all the unnecessary programs, all the outdated files, and rebuilding it with only the most essential truths. What would remain? What would you choose to keep? And what would you discard? In the next part, we are going to go deeper. Because once you understand the power of first principles, you have to ask yourself, how do you actually apply it to your life? How do you break down the biggest challenges you face and rebuild them in a way that actually makes sense? And what happens when you start thinking this way in a world that is built on assumptions? Destroying mental barriers, how first principles thinking frees you from limiting beliefs. The moment you start thinking from first principles, you begin to see the invisible walls that have been trapping you your entire life. These walls are not physical. They are mental. They are built from assumptions, from unchallenged beliefs, from rules that no one ever questioned. And when you look closely, you realize that most of these rules are arbitrary. They are not laws of nature. They are not absolute truths. They are ideas that have been repeated so many times that people simply accept them as reality. But reality is not fixed. It is shaped by those who dare to challenge it. Think about the biggest limitations in your life. The things you believe you can't do. The dreams that feel impossible. The fears that keep you stuck. Where do these beliefs come from? Were you born with them, or did you absorb them over time? Did you ever stop to ask whether they are actually true? Because here is the truth. Most of your limits are illusions. They exist only because you have never questioned them. And first principles thinking is the tool that allows you to break them down. Let's take an example. Imagine you believe that making a lot of money is extremely difficult, that only a small percentage of people ever become wealthy, and that you need to follow a specific path, get a degree, get a stable job, climb the corporate ladder to achieve financial success. This belief feels solid because it is reinforced by society. But if you apply first principles thinking, you strip away the assumptions and ask, what is money? At its core, money is a system of value exchange. But how is money made? Money is created when value is provided to others. But what are the fundamental ways to provide value? You can create something, solve a problem, or improve efficiency. Suddenly, the path to wealth is no longer limited to a single route. You are no longer bound by the traditional career model. You begin to see opportunities that were invisible before because you are no longer thinking by analogy, you are thinking from the ground up. This applies to more than just money. Think about fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of looking stupid. These fears control people's lives. They stop them from trying, from experimenting, from stepping into the unknown. But what is fear really? If you break it down, fear is just a prediction your brain makes about the future. It is an emotional response to uncertainty. But here's the key. Most of the things we fear never actually happen. And even when they do, they are rarely as bad as we imagined. So, if fear is just a flawed prediction engine, why let it dictate your actions? What if you treated fear as just another assumption to be tested rather than a reality to be obeyed? Now, let's go even deeper. What about your identity? The way you define yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your personality, how much of it is truly you, and how much of it is a collection of beliefs that society has shaped. If you have always thought of yourself as an introvert, is that because you genuinely prefer solitude, or is it because at some point in your life, someone labeled you as shy, and you accepted that identity? If you believe you're bad at math, is that because your brain is incapable of understanding numbers, or is it because you struggled once, got frustrated, and decided that math just wasn't your thing? These definitions we place on ourselves, smart, shy, creative, unathletic, are often nothing more than stories we tell ourselves. Stories that can be rewritten. So here's the real question. What parts of yourself have been built on untested assumptions? What if you could break down your entire belief system and rebuild it only with ideas that are actually true? What would you keep? What would you discard? Who would you become if you were free from the mental barriers that have been holding you back? In the next part, we are going to explore what happens when you fully embrace this way of thinking. Because once you start breaking down the world into first principles, you begin to realize something even more powerful. You are not just a passive observer of reality. You are a creator of it. Your reality is malleable. How first principles thinking makes you the architect of your world. Once you start thinking from first principles, something profound happens. You stop seeing the world as something static, something that just is, and you start seeing it as something fluid, something that can be reshaped. You realize that everything around you, everything you take for granted, was created by people no smarter than you. The rules, the systems, the traditions, they were all made up. And if they were made up, they can be changed. The moment this clicks in your mind, you stop being a passive participant in life and start becoming its architect. Most people live as though reality is fixed. They assume that the way things are is the way things will always be. That the structures of society, the norms of behavior, the expectations placed upon them are immovable. But history proves otherwise. Every major breakthrough, every revolution in thought, every leap in human progress has come from someone who refused to accept things as they were and instead asked, how could this be different? The Wright brothers refused to accept that humans couldn't fly. Steve Jobs refused to accept that technology had to be complicated and inaccessible. But every great innovator, every great thinker, every great leader has reached a point where they looked at the world and said, this doesn't have to be this way. And this doesn't just apply to society. It applies to your life, your habits, your routines, your limitations. These are not fixed realities. They are constructs, patterns you have repeated so many times that they feel permanent. But permanence is an illusion. You can change the way you think. You can change the way you react. You can change your entire trajectory simply by questioning the assumptions that have been running your life on autopilot. If you believe you are not a morning person, is that an undeniable fact of your biology, or is it a habit you have reinforced with years of late-night routines? If you believe you are bad at socializing, is that a fundamental truth about your personality, or is it a skill you never took the time to develop? How many of your so-called truths are just unexamined conclusions? And if reality is malleable, if your thoughts and behaviors can be reshaped, then what does that mean for your future? It means you are not chained to your past. It means you are not trapped by your circumstances. It means that possibility is far greater than you ever imagined. But most people never reach this realization because they are too busy following the script that was handed to them. They do what they are told. They follow the well-worn paths. They never stop to ask, is this the best way? But the people who do ask that question, the ones who challenge everything, who break things down to their core and rebuild them from scratch, those are the people who change the world. So now ask yourself, what areas of your life feel stuck? What parts of your reality seem immovable? And what if they weren't? What if, right now, you could start deconstructing the very foundations of your assumptions and rebuilding them with something better? What if you decided that the limits you thought were real were just illusions? Because once you understand that reality is not something you simply live in, but something you can shape, everything changes. In the final part, we are going to take this to its ultimate conclusion. Because if you are truly willing to think from first principles, then you must face the biggest question of all. If nothing is fixed, if everything can be rethought, then who do you choose to become? The ultimate choice, rebuilding yourself from the ground up. If you have followed this journey, then by now, you understand something that most people never realize in their lifetime. Everything you believe about yourself about the world, about what is possible, is built on assumptions. And assumptions can be broken down. They can be rebuilt. They can be discarded entirely. This means that not only is the world malleable, but you are malleable. Your identity, your limitations, your habits, your fears, none of them are set in stone. So now comes the most important question of all: who do you choose to become? Most people never ask themselves this question. They assume that identity is something that happens to them, not something they create. They say things like, "This is just the way I am," as if their personality, their skills, their intelligence, and their potential were decided at birth. But this is another illusion. Who you are is not a fixed entity. It is a collection of patterns, reinforced over time. And if patterns can be changed, then so can you. Imagine just for a moment that you were not bound by any past version of yourself, that you could wipe the slate clean and rebuild yourself from the ground up using only the traits, beliefs, and habits that serve you. What would you keep? What would you let go? Would you still hold onto the fears that have kept you small? Would you still define yourself by past failures, by old labels, by the limitations that others placed on you? Or would you start over, crafting a new version of yourself based on first principles, one that is not limited by outdated assumptions, but instead built entirely on what is true, what is useful, and what is possible? This is the most radical idea of all. You are not a finished product. You are a process, and you are in control of that process. You are not your past. You are not your mistakes. You are not the labels you have been given. You are whatever you decide to become. But transformation does not happen by accident. It happens by design. It happens when you stop living on autopilot and start consciously shaping your own mind, your own habits, your own future. So now, the final challenge: take a part of your life, any part that feels stuck, that feels impossible to change, and break it down to first principles. Strip away the assumptions. Question everything. What if the way you've always done things is not the best way? What if the obstacles in front of you are not real barriers, but simply mental constructs? What if the version of yourself you have accepted as who you are is just one possibility, and a much greater version of you is waiting to be built? The world belongs to those who think this way, the ones who refuse to accept limits, the ones who see obstacles not as walls, but as puzzles to be solved, the ones who do not just follow the path but create their own. And now you know the truth. You are one of them. The only question that remains is whether you will act on it. Will you keep thinking the way you always have, or will you start thinking from first principles? Will you stay within the boundaries of the person you have always been, or will you step into the person you were meant to become? The choice is yours. It has always been yours.